A'udhu billahi minash shaitanir rajim. Bismillahir rahmanir rahim. O Allah, we ask you to send your blessings upon our Master Muhammad, the opener of what was closed and the seal of what came before him, champion of the truth by the truth and guide to the straight path, and upon his family and companions as is befitting his noble rank. Ameen. O Allah, the noble, the generous, we ask you to ennoble us with the light of understanding and to remove us from the shadows of illusion. And there is no power nor might except through God. Ameen. So we're going through the pillars of Islam, and earlier in the class we discussed the Shahada, and I didn't recap that this time around just because we've talked a lot about the testimony of faith. But in the past weeks we've sort of been going over like the prerequisites for the prayer and then the prayer, which is one pillar of the religion. This week, we're going to go over Zakah, which is the purifying charity that we pay on our wealth. We're going to get to go into more depth about that tonight. But this is a pillar of our religion, which means that Zakah is an act of worship. Giving this money is an act of worship that is on par with things that we might be more inclined to think of as acts of worship, like prayer, fasting, pilgrimage, which we'll talk about as well. But this is something that is a social act. In order to give zakah, you have to give it to someone. So there's always a social aspect of zakah. And yet it's an act of worship. This in itself tells us something very important about Islam, which is that it often defies our expectations of religion. And you'll hear people say things like, Islam's more than a religion, it's a way of life, or Islam is all encompassing. Or oftentimes these ideas are coming from people like myself who come from a Christian background, where for us growing up, religion is very much a confined thing. It's a personal belief. It is something that you do on Sunday. And, I think for many of us, the way we were raised is that compartmentalization is a very real lived experience. That Sunday was the religious day in my week. The other days of the week were not religious days. I didn't do anything related to my church, religion, thinking about God, oftentimes. And that was a very normal experience. So zakah is telling us that our conception of worship is far more all-encompassing, because this is a social act that we engage in, and yet it is a pillar of our religion. It's an act of worship. And so by extension, many other things in our religion are like this. Simply the intention that we make to do what we would normally consider to be mundane actions can transform those actions into acts of worship. So going to work, right? You work a corporate job, but you work that corporate job with the intention, I want to be able to pay zakah, or I want to be able to send my kids to Quran lessons, whatever the case may be. Those intentions transform that action, which is a mundane action, into an act of worship itself. So this is sort of giving us a hint at all of that. But let's talk about what zakah is. Literally in Arabic, the word zakah is related to purity, or to purifying something. We have this other word for a spiritual practice called tazkiyatul nafs, which is purifying the self. And they come from the same root. Zakah is a purifying alm. In fact, that's often how you'll see the word translated. It's the purifying alm. And when we give it, what we understand is that by giving it, we are putting blessings in the money that we keep. So that process of purification puts God's blessings in the money that we keep, so that when we spend that money that we do keep, it actually enriches us. It actually allows us to have a sense of like safety, security, being well off, that these are blessings that we derive from the money that we keep. And it purifies that wealth by giving it to people who are not eligible to pay it. And this, we'll talk more about it, but it does a lot to sort of uplift society as a whole. When you talk about zakah, you really get like a good picture into like Islam's social vision. Like, what should societies look like? What should human relations in like the ideal society look like? And zakah fills in a big piece of that picture. The Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, whoever gives zakah on their wealth, its evil will leave it. The evil that is in your wealth will leave it. And so, you know, we often associate money with evil. I think that's very natural. There's a saying like, you know, money is the root of all evil. Money corrupts people. It changes their character. What this is doing is, inshallah, like when we give that zakah, it is removing any evil that may be in that money from it, so that the only thing you experience from your wealth is blessing. And he also said, protect your wealth with zakah, which on the face of it might be the opposite of what we expect. You are giving money away. It feels like you're diminishing your wealth. In fact, what you're doing is you're protecting it by putting that blessing in that money. I don't know if you've ever had this experience, but I certainly have had times in my life where I've had more money, I've had less money, in like a quantitative, like numerical sense. But I have had the experience of having more money and getting less out of it, and having less money and getting more out of it. Like I've just had money where it's like, it seems abundant. It seems abundant, but for some reason, it's like I can't hang on to it. Every month, like that balance just gets lower and lower, even though like the incoming deposits are greater and greater. The barakah, the blessing that is kept by giving some of this money away, that is what we are trying to achieve. So that no matter what you have, there's blessing in it. It's there. It's actually providing for you. And he says, take from your wealth and give back to the poor. Take from your wealth and give back to the poor. This is a very important principle when it comes to thinking about what zakah actually is. We call it charity in English, and that sort of lends the idea that like we're doing a favor. Like when we think about giving charity, when we use that word in English, it's usually associated with like doing a favor. It's like, I didn't have to do this. Well, first of all, like sort of according to the Sharia, the divine law, yes, you do have to do this. But what that mandate, what that requirement, that obligation that's placed on you is actually reflecting is an inward reality, that this money is not yours, not all of it. That no matter how we make our wealth, there is always some level of exploitation to that. There's always some level of exploitation. There's always some way in which we are earning on the back of someone. And so, in fact, what we are doing is we are giving that money back to the people who are deserving of it. And there are very specific things that we do when we give zakah that reflect that we'll talk about, inshallah. But this provides a personal purification for us and for our wealth, even if we put aside the idea that, like, you know, there is some exploitation that comes along with accruing wealth. There would still be a need for purification of that wealth, for the simple reason that it is very, very difficult, even if you're very scrupulous, to be 100% sure that you made all of that money honestly. I think that's very, very difficult to say. It's like, you know, even if you're working a 9 to 5 and it's like, I get the same check, like I'm not out here, in sales and, like maybe like selling some features of a product that may not actually be there, but you're getting a check every month or every 2 weeks, whatever the case may be. It's like all those hours that you logged, where you work, you sure you weren't on Twitter just a little bit, like on company time, you weren't just on Reddit, like looking at the latest post in your favorite like subreddit. You weren't doing anything like that. There wasn't a little way in which you maybe just like fudged the facts. If you were, let's say, in a sales job, you really like overpitched this product that you're selling. So it's extremely difficult. Like if we were to take ourselves to account at like a very, very exacting standard, if we were to do that, it'll be very difficult for us to ever say, yeah, I'm 100% confident that absolutely every cent that I earned this month or over the course of this entire year, I earned honestly. And so what Zakah is doing is it's allowing us to put blessing into what we keep by giving just a little bit of it away. That's part of this process of purification that we're going through when we give Zakah. And when we give it, there are certain etiquettes that we are to engage in as we actually give the money. So, and this goes back to what I was saying about the fact that it is owed to people who need it. It is owed to people who cannot pay Zakah. You either can pay it and you pay it, or you cannot pay it and you're eligible to receive it. It is actually owed to the people who are eligible to receive it. So when we give it, we're to smile, for example. Like the same way that we would smile if we, could imagine that we are in dire circumstances and we were on the street begging. Someone gives us $1, $5, $10. That would bring a smile to our face. Why? Because they've done us a favor. They've done a kindness to us. And we want to, live as much in that reality. And, it may not feel like it when you give that money away. It may actually hurt. You may actually have to like fight the impulse to cringe a little bit as you hand that money away. But what that smile, like if you can just force yourself to like bring that smile to your face, what that is intended to do to us eventually is to bring us into that reality that, no, this person is doing me a favor. Like they are taking their due from me. I owe this to them. And they are the ones who are doing me a favor. The same as if we were out on the street begging and someone gave us money. The etiquette of the Arabs at the time of the Prophet ﷺ was that in an exchange, like a physical exchange of money, the person giving money, who was considered to have, we would say even in English, the upper hand. The person with the money has the upper hand. And so the etiquette was always that they would literally have the upper hand, like in that exchange. The person giving the money would have the upper hand, and the person receiving it would have their palm upward to receive it. The etiquette when we give zakah is exactly the opposite, for the exact same reason that we smile. They're doing us a favor. They are allowing us to purify our wealth, to put blessing into it. And so when we give zakah, the etiquette is actually that we hold it out like this, so that the person taking it has the upper hand, that they are in the more virtuous position in that exchange, reflecting that inner reality that like, yeah, like they're doing us a favor. They're helping us in this moment. And I don't know how familiar you guys are with Sheikh Hamza Yusuf, but he's got his Sheikh Hamza isms that I just really love sometimes. And he talks about the fact, it's kind of funny, but he talks about the fact that the Arabic word for a miser, like someone who is very stingy with their money, the Arabic word for that person is a munsik, a munsik. And that the same word is used for a constipated person. The miser and the constipated person, they have the same word. They're both called munsik. And it's really interesting to think about why. because I mean, sorry, I mean, I apologize, but you know, it is like a helpful sort of illustration of this idea that we're getting at. When you withhold something, and please follow me as I try to dance around getting too graphic here, but when you withhold something, that makes you sick. That makes you sick. When you hold something that naturally needs to be expelled, that is an unhealthy action that you are taking. That ultimately could seriously affect your health. And so the idea here is that the miser, the one who is greedy and clinging to their money, they're actually holding on to something that they need to let go of, that would actually be better for them if they were just to let go of it. If they were to smile, if they were to hold their hand out and just allow that money to be taken out of their palm, what they would find is their spiritual health and the sort of social health of the society that they live in would be much improved. Because, and again, sort of dancing around this, forgive me, but you have healthy flows of wealth that are taking place in that society. We have this word munsik in Arabic, which has this dual meaning. The other way that this purifies us, and this really gets into some of like the spiritual virtues of zakah, of charity, is that it is an act of courage. Especially, you know, like I lived many years of my life when I could not pay zakah, like well into my adulthood, I could not pay zakah. And part of the reason for that is, as we'll see, zakah is not a tax on income, it's a tax on wealth. So even though I had income, I was spending most of it. So I was not eligible to pay zakah. But when I could for the first time, I remember having this feeling like, I was like, I just got this money. It's like, I finally have savings and I'm really going to give it away now. And it's a real act of courage to do something like that, especially for the first time. But what that act is training you to do is it's training you to come into a certain spiritual realization, which is that your destiny, your future, your life is in Allah's hands. Like, it's not up to you. Like that number, like when I open like my Capital One app on my phone, like that number at the end of the day is not going to be what determines my life or death, my, you know, homelessness, my ability to eat, or any of that from my family. It's a law. It's a law. And one of the things, if you ever have the opportunity to talk to people who give a lot, like really like go above and beyond what is actually required of them in giving and charity, what they will tell you is like, I don't know how to explain it, but I swear to you, the more I give, the more that it ends up coming to me. There's no logical way that I could actually tell you how that works, but that has been my experience. The more I give, the more that comes to me. So like what their reality, like the state that they live in, is like, I'm really not in control of like what's in my bank account at any given time. I could just start giving this stuff away and somehow it would come back to me. And there are stories of companions for whom that was true, where like they actually wanted to live in a state of what's called zuhud, of renunciation. Like that was an aspiration of theirs, even though they were wealthy people. And they're like, I keep trying to give this money away and somehow it keeps coming back to me. So this is a very well-known principle in our religion, that our rizq, our provision, whatever it is that God decrees that we have in this life, whether it's like wealth, children, whatever our provision is, that it comes from Allah. It doesn't come from our own actions. Ultimately, it comes from Allah. And so this yearly pillar of our religion of paying the zakah, what it's doing is at the spiritual level, it's trying to pull us into that reality. Now, as I mentioned at the beginning, there's a social element to all of this. Zakah is somewhat unique in the sense that it is a pillar of our religion. It's an act of worship that is by definition social in nature. There have to be two parties to the exchange when zakah is given. And there's a social purification that happens when zakah is given. The Prophet ﷺ said that human hearts are made to love those who do good to them. So you're not just purifying your own wealth. You're not just training yourself to live according to an unseen reality, which is that God is the provider. But what you're doing is you're actually sowing seeds of harmony in the place that you live. Because ideally, and we'll get to this, zakat ought to be given locally, ideally. And there are like websites, you know, like Islamic Relief, like all these great websites where you can just like go enter your credit card number and they'll give it to like someone in like Ukraine or whatever the hot button issue of the year is. You know, it changes all the time. But ideally, if you can, like if you know of people who would benefit from receiving zakah in your local area, that really is the ideal. And this is the reason for that, is that you're sowing these seeds of harmony in the society that you live in, where you're like actually creating bonds of affection. Because, you know, for some people, their zakat payment is substantial. Like some people make quite a bit of money. And, you know, depending on how they want to divvy that up, they could go to someone who is in dire need and they could just cure their situation overnight. Some people can do that. And you think about the relationship that is built between two people when something like that happens. Like when you're in hardship and like you have this sense of drowning, and this is a reality for many people nowadays. Someone just knocks on your door and says, hey, problem solved. Like that, like you will remain grateful to that person for the rest of your life. And chances are you will never be able to do that for them, right? You'll never be able to repay that in the way that they took care of you in that moment. There may be other ways that you can repay them. But so then how do you take that feeling of gratitude and really express that? Perhaps you get to the point where you can do that for someone else. And so this is like a virtuous cycle. Inshallah, that's part of the intent, is that you enact a virtuous cycle where you then go help somebody because you know what a relief that is. And so you're like, okay, I'm going to find someone someday that I can do this for, and I will take care of them in this way. So it brings love between the hearts of people who exchange zakah. And according to many scholars, you know, I mean, I guess this is almost saying the same thing, but like it creates love between people. But I think maybe even more important, especially for the times that we live in, because of a lot of the things that you hear people talking about nowadays, more importantly than creating love is it simply removes resentment. You hear a lot of growing class consciousness that is highly antagonistic in our society. And I'm not saying any of that is like unjustified, but we don't live in a society where we're sort of set up so that the rich and the poor can actually have bonds of love and affection between them. We live in a society where generally the rich are getting back rich off the back of the poor. In fact, I was reading that the exact, you know, like Jeff Bezos became multiple times more wealthy in the year 2020 than he was previously. Why? Because like everyone was sitting at home, they couldn't go out, they were like ordering off of Amazon, right? Amazon owns Whole Foods now, so they're like even getting their groceries from Amazon. And what was really amazing is that the amount of wealth that was transferred out of the middle class in the year 2020 is almost the exact same number that Jeff Bezos's wealth increased that year. And like, again, I don't want this to be sort of interpreted as like an anti-capitalist tirade on my part. But the point here is that we live in a society where we do not have a mechanism like Zakah, whereby Jeff Bezos would feel compelled to give 2.5% of his wealth each year, and thereby create these bonds of love and affection. Like, imagine if you lived next to Jeff Bezos and you were like, man, I live next to Jeff Bezos. Like I mean, where are they? They're like in Seattle or something. I'm not sure. It doesn't matter, but let's just say it's Seattle. It's like, man, I'm in Seattle. Ramadan's coming around. That's when most people pay their zakat. I can't wait. I've been hurting. You know, like 2020 has been tough. Like that government stimulus check wasn't enough. Like I still need groceries. And you knew Jeff Bezos was going to pay his zakat and that he was in the habit of paying it locally. Like that would be a cause for celebration. Oh, he made how much money this year? And 2021 is going to be even better. Right? But we don't live in that society. So in removing resentment from the hearts, and on top of that, creating love and affection, you actually create societies that are cohesive, where we have a sense of solidarity that are not on the basis of class lines. They're just like, yeah, like we belong to each other in a very real sense. That's something that Zakah enables. So that's kind of like the idea, like the vision of Zakah. Let's talk about the fiqh, or like the jurisprudence, the legal rulings of Zakah. And these are very interesting. These are very, very interesting. Excuse me. We've already talked about some of the etiquettes, but as I mentioned, Zakah ideally is a local tax. You ideally want to be going to people who are nearest to you. And he says that the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam says that those closest to you are the most worthy of your help. So you can actually start, when it comes time to pay zakah, if you're eligible to pay, you can actually start with your family members if they are in need of it. Like if they aren't eligible to pay it, and they have some need, and they fit the categories that we're going to get into in just a minute, you can give your zakat to family members. And the order that we actually ought to go in, ideally speaking, are relatives, then neighbors, and then people like, let's say, like within our neighborhood. And then we're in Chicago, so we'll say like North Side, which is where I live. So for me, it would be North Side. Then City of Chicago, then Cook County, Illinois. And then, you know, mashallah, if you're getting like this big, as you get to like USA, mashallah, God bless you, you know. But the idea here, you think about what happens. I have zakah to pay. I go and I check with my family members. Okay, everyone is taken care of there. I go and check with my wife's family members. Okay, everyone's good. What does that mean? That means we have an entire family of people who are eligible to pay zakah. Meaning we've got an entire family of people who do not need to be paying zakah to each other. So you've got an entire family that's going to be sending money out into the neighborhood. And you think about what that does. You're going to be getting people, inshallah, in your neighborhood on their feet. Because one of the ideals of zakah is not that you continue to give to people year after year after year. You can, if they continue to need zakah, but the idea ultimately is you get them to a place where they are actually eligible to pay zakah rather than receive it. So then you create a neighborhood that is in no need of zakah. And you have a neighborhood that is able to reach out to its surrounding area to give zakat to other people. So you just slowly are creating these zones of security, of financial security. This is called wealth creation. This is called uh, capital building, right? It's how civilization, like in sort of like the classical sense of that word, is actually built through capital accumulation. You help others get on their feet, and through doing that, you create entire societies of people who are producing beyond their means and saving beyond their means and are able to help those who are not able to do so. So it just kind of spreads outward in a really beautiful way. So let's look at who's eligible to receive zakah. And this is where we have to really sort of think critically about how it applies to our own time. Because what you're going to get when we talk about the categories of people who can receive zakah is really like a picture of like how jacked up we are as a society right now. Many of us, even though we can probably pay zakah, we will fall into some of the categories of people who ought to receive it simply because we don't have the same conceptions of wealth and security that people at the time of the Prophet ﷺ did. So the first is poor people. Makes sense. But we specifically mean two types of poor people who are eligible to receive zakah. The first is the miskeen. And this means poor, but there are other words for poor. The miskeen is a person who has less than 1 day's provision. So like no food in the pantry, no food in the fridge, no money in the savings account, like absolutely destitute. If you literally want to know what miskeen means, it means like broken. That's what it means. It's the broken person. I guess we say broke in English too. So, you know, it kind of translates a little bit. But this is like the dead broke person. So this person obviously is eligible to receive zakah. But this is where it gets kind of interesting. The second category of poor person is what's called the faqir. And the faqir is one who has less than a year's provision. And this is where I think, oh, well, that's probably most of us. That's probably most of us, even though our standard of living is quite nice in this country. We do live paycheck to paycheck. As a society, by and large, we do live paycheck to paycheck. How many of us have a year's worth of money saved up somewhere? How many of us have a year's worth of food and water saved up somewhere? Probably almost no one. So that like, if you did fall on really hard times, you know that you would have your basic provisions taken care of. It's like, I know I'm not going to starve. I know I'm going to like be able to pay my rent or my mortgage payment for another year while I'm working on finding a job or getting my startup going, whatever the case may be, right? A year's provision. That is inconceivable for most Americans. And yet that is a category of poor person. So, I mean, what's the lesson here? Like if you have the minimum amount that is eligible to pay zakah, then you still have to pay zakah. But what this ought to tell you is that there is a standard and it really like a conception of wealth that we ought to try to like adjust to. It's like as we're like building our portfolios and our 401ks, we ought to also be asking ourselves, like, do I have a year's worth of savings? And like food and like, you know, things like that, necessary provisions are included in this. Do I have a year's worth of food saved up? You know, you don't have to go full prepper mode. Like that show like Doomsday Preppers. I don't know if you guys have ever seen. You don't have to like go crazy and like bury these shipping containers in your backyard and like have a bunker. You don't have to do all that. But like start making the shift in mindset a little bit and realize where the prophetic standard is. As always, the prophetic standard is our North Star. We're always shooting for it. It's always like where we are trying to get, maybe one day, eventually, inshallah. But we don't get down on ourselves because we're not there right now. Okay, so the poor person. Then the people who collect zakah. So this is just like a very practical, like if it is your business to collect zakah, you may take your paycheck from zakah funds. That's halal, that's permissible, that's an okay thing to do. Then there are indebted people. So again, like people who are severely in debt, and the zakat payment to them would like seriously alleviate their situation. You can pay zakat to them as long as they didn't incur the debt through some type of like ethically dubious venture, like they just had like a wild weekend in Vegas or something like that. That would not make them zakat eligible. But like credit card debt, because the paycheck's not covering expenses, sure. Yeah, Joe. Well, if they went to Vegas to give dawah and still somehow lost a whole bunch of money, I got questions about what kind of dawah they were giving in Vegas. That's it's like, well, the guy I was giving dawah to was at the roulette table, so I was trying to relate to him. I just threw a few, and no, it doesn't work like that. Good try though, Joe. I see you. All right. Don't let me catch you on Instagram in Vegas. I was just in Vegas, actually. I was just in Vegas, but I was passing through. Alhamdulillah. We had the opportunity to either fly into Vegas because we were going to Utah, or to fly into Salt Lake City. And I told my wife, I was like, honey, I'm glad I got to see Vegas, but next time, like, let's go be with the God-fearing people in Salt Lake City. Like, what? Like, I feel like I could get down with the Mormons, Vegas was exactly what I expected it to be. It was wild. Unbelievable. And they're so not through something ethically dubious, and their situation has to really be dire. Oh, you have a grand in credit card debt, but like you make $6,000 a month, like you're probably going to be fine. You don't need my zakat for that, right? Then there are the indentured servants or slaves, people for whom if you were to pay money, you would release them from bondage. Now, this is an interesting one because formally, we do not have slavery in the United States. However, and I got called out for this, but I once had questions that I voiced in this exact class about the viability of giving zakat to an organization called Believers Bailout, which takes zakat money and releases people from jail by posting bond for them. I really felt like I was asked about this, like, is that okay? Is that permissible? And I felt like I was being like asked a fatwa, and I just I said, well, like according to like the letter of this, like no, because I don't think they're like technically enslaved. I ended up talking to a number of scholars who were like, actually, in fact, like we think that this is very applicable. Especially, I heard some stories about Cook County, which were like, yeah, that's slavery. One person told me that while they were in Cook County, and I won't say who they are, they met a woman who had been there awaiting trial for 10 years. 10 years. I mean, that's like unconstitutional if you want to like, not that anyone obeys the Constitution anymore, but like it's wrongful, or no, you have a right to speedy trial. You're the lawyer, Joe. Isn't that correct? Yeah. But she had been in Cook County for 10 years awaiting trial. And I don't know why, but God knows why. But that's inconceivable. That woman is enslaved. Her freedom has been removed for her unjustly. She has been convicted of no crime. She ought not to be held like that. So if you could post bond for that woman, Would you be releasing her from a form of slavery? Yes, indeed. Yes, indeed. So here again is my official endorsement of Believers Bailout. Mashallah. If you have zakat to pay, they are an excellent organization to support. Then there is the traveler. This is, anything that is made permissible continues to be permissible. But this is like, because travel used to be a much more harrowing experience than it is today, where, especially like people who went on the Hajj, on the pilgrimage to Mecca, they would like sell their possessions. And it was as if they were preparing to die. Like they would settle all of their affairs, because you very well could die on the way to Mecca, especially if you're traveling like thousands of miles. Traveling was a very uncertain enterprise. Weather, bandits, wild animals, you don't know what's going to happen. So it is very easy in that type of situation at that time, in that context, for someone to lose their wealth while traveling. They could be robbed, they could be waylaid, God knows what. So zakah is something that could be provided to the traveler. But again, like in the same way that like we can still shorten our prayers today while we travel, even though travel is easy for us by comparison to what it used to be. You can give money to travelers, right? Especially travelers who may not have much. Then there is a category which in Arabic we call mu'alafat qulubuhum, which is literally like those whose hearts may be endeared to us. And these are, first of all, take note, new Muslims. This is you, right? You just embrace this religion. Doesn't matter your financial situation. You can be Jeff Bezos. If Jeff Bezos came in here and took his shahada, he would be zakat eligible because he's a brand new Muslim. And what are we trying to do? We're trying to endear his heart to us. Probably our money is not going to mean much to him, but maybe, it's the thought that counts, inshallah. It would be the thought that counts with Jeff Bezos. It does something to the heart. It's like, wow, these people really care for me. So new converts are zakat eligible, as well as those people who are like interested. They're asking about Islam. They too are zakat eligible. And in a different time where you had actual Muslim dominions, Muslim dominions could give zakat money to neighboring Christian dominions or neighboring dominions of like other religious faiths to sort of like have good relationships with them. It's like, you're not too sure about us. Like we have this border. You don't know what our intentions are. Here's a gift of some zakat money. Please like us. Please have good relationships with us. That was something that we did in the past as well. And then there is fi sabilillah, jihad. Second time I got to mention that word today, mashallah. For people who are fighting in jihad or supporting those who are fighting in jihad, let me clarify. For those of you who have hair standing up on the back of your neck, for our resident FBI agent who may be online watching, this is legitimate jihad. This is jihad that is declared for a legitimate reason, for which we have very strict rules by a legitimate Muslim ruler. So not something that we are going to engage in. We are not going to be able to pay zakah for jihad fi sabilillah, which means striving in the path of God. But that is a category that has been viable in the past, that may be viable at some point in the future. For most of us right now, it is not. If you were like, let's say, living in Chechnya back in the 90s and you're being oppressed by the Russians, then it might be viable for you. But like 2022, United States of America, you can cross that one off the list. All right, we good, Homeland Security? Inshallah, we're good. Huh? No, I was looking at the camera. Okay. So that's who's eligible to receive it. Who's eligible to pay? To be eligible to pay, you have to, first of all, have savings, and I'm going to get more into this. It is savings that you have had for at least a year that meets what is called the nisab, or the liability minimum. Meaning, if you have this minimum amount that you have saved for more than a year, then you are liable to pay zakah. This is called nisab in Arabic. So what this is, it changes in dollar terms. It's always the same amount in gold or silver. So it's the equivalent of 85 grams of gold or 595 grams of silver. So this year in 2022, I just looked this up today, that's about $4,732, 85 grams of gold. So if you have had that balance in your savings account, or don't get sneaky, like you're checking too, if you just keep money there, like don't try to play games. Well, it's in my checking account. Technically, I don't use my savings account, so I never have to pay zakah. If you had a balance of cash in the value of $4,732 for more than a year, then in 2022, you were eligible to pay zakah. And so what you would do is you would pay 2.5% of whatever that balance is. 2.5%. And that's it. Very, very straightforward. There are somewhat different rulings for like livestock, which is like 10%. Agricultural products, like if you grew wheat, it would be a different number. But I think for most of us in this room, like our wealth is stored in dollar bills. So we want to know what that is. But that tells us some important things. First of all, 2.5% is not much. And I don't know how many of you were here for my rant a few weeks ago on the IRS, but like if you want to compare that to what the IRS asks of us, it really is not much, which is amazing to think. What does the IRS offer? Well, if you don't pay your taxes, they offer you prison time. What does the law offer? Like Jannatun tajri min tahtiha al-anhar, like gardens from which rivers flow, right? 2.5%, you're offered like eternal bliss. 20 to 30, I think, is what most of us pay in taxes to the IRS. Jail time. Okay, I'm not going on my IRS rant again, but that's one thing. Like Jannah is much cheaper than the dunya. And isn't that amazing? That's an amazing thing to ponder. Heaven is cheaper than this world. Second thing is that 2.5% not being that much, this isn't really meant to diminish you in any significant way. Why? Because you want to continue to be a person who can pay zakah. Like we're not meant to be taxed to a level where we are impoverished. And so that what the tax is actually doing is throwing us into a state where we become needy of charity. It's 2.5%, 1/40th of our wealth, of our standing wealth. And the last thing is that this is a tax on our standing wealth, not our income. So this is very important because, in fact, the Sharia forbids, and let me get to the end of this because I'm not advocating anything illegal, but it forbids paying income taxes. Why? Because that is a form of oppression. Does the IRS, I guess I'm going on IRS rant, I just need to embrace it. Does the IRS care? Like you make $200,000. No, this is a hypothetical. It's a big hypothetical, especially for you and I. You make $200,000, but you've got 9 kids, for example. You have sick elderly parents and sick elderly in-laws, and your expenses are like $190,000. Does the IRS care whether or not you have expenses that are almost, that leave you with $10,000 in savings at the end of the year? No, they do not. No, they do not. That, according to our divine law, is a form of oppression. Because what is going to happen is you are going to have to go in debt despite your income to continue to provide for your family. It's a form of oppression. Now, the reason I say I'm not advocating anything illegal is because we do not put ourselves in a state of jeopardy. That is absolutely something that we do not do. Going to prison is a horrific proposition in this country. It's not something you want to endure. So we obey the law. We keep ourselves out of situations like that. We don't want to be locked up in Cook County 10 years awaiting trial. So we don't do things like that. But just so you know how God's law differs from the laws that we live under in this country, that is a profound difference. It's a profound difference. So it is only on savings, on stored wealth. It's not on income. And what this does is it allows us to have certain flows of wealth in our society so that like we're not hoarding everything. We're not able to just keep everything back in our own coffers. We have to let some of it go and start flowing around in society and spreading the wealth. So this is, you know, in that sort of like comparison, incredibly merciful. Like when you kind of like break it down and really understand what's going on with Zakah, it is an incredibly merciful form of worship that has been given to us. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم والعصر إن الإنسان لفي خسر إلا الذين آمنوا وعملوا الصالحات وتواصوا بالحق وتواصوا بالصبر آمين.